The Association of Southeast Asian Nations is a regional organization comprising 10 Southeast Asian states which promotes intergovernmental cooperation and facilitates economic integration amongst its members. Since its formation on August 8, 1967 by Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand, the organization's membership has expanded to include Brunei, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam. Its principal aims include accelerating economic growth, social progress, and socio-cultural evolution among its members, alongside the protection of regional stability and the provision of a mechanism for member countries to resolve differences peacefully. ASEAN covers a land area of 4.4 million square kilometers, 3% of the total land area of Earth. ASEAN territorial waters cover an area about 3 times larger than its land counterpart. Member countries have a combined population of approximately 625 million people, 8.8% of the world's population. In 2015, the organization's combined nominal GDP had grown to more than $2.8 trillion. If ASEAN were a single entity, it would rank as the 6th largest economy in the world, behind the USA, China, Japan, Germany, and the United Kingdom. ASEAN shares land borders with India, China, Bangladesh, East Timor, and Papua New Guinea, and maritime borders with India, China, and Australia. Both East Timor and Papua New Guinea are backed by certain ASEAN members for the membership in the organization. Purpose. As set out in the ASEAN Declaration, the aims and purposes of ASEAN are to accelerate economic growth, social progress, and cultural development in the region, to promote regional peace and stability, to promote collaboration and mutual assistance on matters of common interest, to provide assistance to each other in the form of training and research facilities, to collaborate for the better utilization of agriculture and industry to raise the living standards of the people, to promote Southeast Asian studies, to maintain close, beneficial cooperation with existing international organizations with similar aims and purposes. History. Foundation. ASEAN was preceded by an organization formed in 1961 called the Association of Southeast Asia, a group consisting of the Philippines, Malaysia, and Thailand. ASEAN itself was created on 8 August 1967 when the foreign ministers of 5 countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand, signed the ASEAN Declaration, more commonly known as the Bangkok Declaration. The creation of ASEAN was motivated by a common fear of communism and a thirst for economic development. ASEAN grew when Brunei Darussalam became its 6th member on 7 January 1984, barely a week after gaining independence. Expansion and further integration. ASEAN achieved greater cohesion in the mid-1970s following the changed balance of power in Southeast Asia after the end of the Vietnam War. The region's dynamic economic growth during the 1970s strengthened the organization, enabling ASEAN to adopt a unified response to Vietnam's invasion of Cambodia in 1979. ASEAN's first summit meeting, held in Bali, Indonesia in 1976, resulted in an agreement on several industrial projects and the signing of a Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, and a Declaration of Concord. The end of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union at the end of the 1980s allowed ASEAN countries to exercise greater political independence in the region, and in the 1990s ASEAN emerged as a leading voice on regional trade and security issues. On 28 July 1995, Vietnam became ASEAN's 7th member. Laos and Myanmar joined 2 years later on 23 July 1997. Cambodia was to have joined at the same time as Laos and Burma. but its entry was delayed due to the country's internal political struggle. It later joined on the 30th of April 1999, following the stabilization of its government. In 1990, Malaysia proposed the creation of an East Asia Economic Caucus composed of the members of ASEAN as well as the People's Republic of China, Japan, and South Korea, with the intention of counterbalancing the growing influence of the United States in Asia-Pacific economic cooperation and in the Asian region as a whole. However, the proposal failed because of heavy opposition from the US and Japan. Member states continued to work for further integration, and ASEAN Plus 3 was created in 1997. In 1992, the Common Effective Preferential Tariff Scheme was adopted as a schedule for phasing out tariffs with the goal to increase the region's competitive advantage as a production base geared for the world market. This law would act as the framework for the ASEAN Free Trade Area. AFTA is an agreement by member nations concerning local manufacturing in ASEAN countries. The AFTA agreement was signed on the 28th of January 1992 in Singapore. After the East Asian financial crisis of 1997, a revival of the Malaysian proposal, known as the Chiang Mai Initiative, was put forward in Chiang Mai, Thailand. It called for better integration of the economies of ASEAN as well as the ASEAN Plus 3 countries China, Japan, and South Korea. The bloc also focused on peace and stability in the region. On the 15th of December 1995, the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone Treaty was signed with the intention of turning Southeast Asia into a nuclear weapon-free zone. The treaty took effect on the 28th of March 1997 after all but one of the member states had ratified it. It became fully effective on the 21st of June 2001 after the Philippines ratified it, effectively banning all nuclear weapons in the region. Charter on the 15th of December 2008, the members of ASEAN met in the Indonesian capital of Jakarta to launch a charter signed in November 2007, with the aim of moving closer to an EU-style community. The charter turned ASEAN into a legal entity and aimed to create a single free trade area for the region encompassing 500 million people. President of Indonesia Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono stated, "This is a momentous development when ASEAN is consolidating, integrating, and transforming itself into a community. It is achieved while ASEAN seeks a more vigorous role in Asian and global affairs at a time when the international system is experiencing a seismic shift." Referring to climate change and economic upheaval, he concluded, "Southeast Asia is no longer the bitterly divided, war-torn region it was in the 1960s and 1970s. The 2008 global financial crisis was seen as being a threat to the goals envisioned by the Charter, and also set forth the idea of a proposed human rights body to be discussed at a future summit in February 2009. This proposition caused controversy, as the body would not have the power to impose sanctions or punish countries which violated citizens' rights and would therefore be limited in effectiveness. The body was established later in 2009 as the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. In November 2012, the Commission adopted the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. The ASEAN Way. The ASEAN Way refers to a methodology or approach to solving issues that respects the cultural norms of Southeast Asia. Maslamani and Peterson summarize it as a working process, a style that is informal and personal. Policymakers constantly utilize compromise, consensus, and consultation in the informal decision-making process. It above all prioritizes a consensus-based, non non-conflictual way of addressing problems. Quiet diplomacy allows ASEAN leaders to communicate without bringing the discussions into the public view. Members avoid embarrassment that may lead to further conflict. It has been said that the merits of the ASEAN way might be usefully applied to global conflict management, but this can be only applied in ASEAN regional countries because due to living way style of these peoples and not need to see eye to eye for their conflicts to sort out. They do all this by only respect for each other. Contradictory to it, this way is not acceptable for entire world major conflicts. Because of different mindset and level of tension, critics object, claiming that the ASEAN way's emphasis on consultation, consensus, and non-interference forces the organization to adopt only those policies which satisfy the lowest common denominator. Decision-making by consensus requires members to see eye to eye before ASEAN can move forward on an issue. Members may not have a common conception of the meaning of the ASEAN way. Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos emphasize non-interference while older member countries focus on cooperation and coordination. These differences hinder efforts to find common solutions to particular issues, but also make it difficult to determine when collective action is appropriate in a given situation. ASEAN +3. The leaders of each country felt the need to further integrate the nations in the region. Beginning in 1997, the bloc started creating organizations with the intention of achieving this goal. ASEAN +3 was the first of these and was created to improve existing ties with the People's Republic of China, Japan, and South Korea. This was followed by the even larger East Asia Summit, which included ASEAN +3 countries as well as India, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and Russia. This new group acted as a prerequisite for the planned East Asia Community, which was supposedly patterned after the now defunct European Community. The ASEAN Eminent Persons Group was created to study the possible successes and failures of this policy as well as the possibility of drafting an ASEAN Charter. In 2006, ASEAN was given observer status at the United Nations General Assembly. In response, the organization awarded the status of dialogue partner to the UN. Economy overview. ASEAN is built on three pillars: the ASEAN Political Security Community, the ASEAN Economic Community, and the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community. ASEAN sought economic integration by creating the AEC by the end of 2015. This established a common market. The average economic growth of ASEAN's member nations during 1989 to 2009 was between 3.8% and 7%. This economic growth was greater than the average growth of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, which was 2.8%. The ASEAN Free Trade Area, which was established on the 28th of January 1992, includes a common effective preferential tariff to promote the free flow of goods between member states. When the AFTA agreement was originally signed, ASEAN had only 6 members: Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. Vietnam joined in 1995, Laos and Burma in 1997, and Cambodia in 1999. The newcomers have not fully met AFTA's obligations, but they are officially considered part of the AFTA as they were required to sign the agreement upon entry into ASEAN, and were given longer time frames in which to meet AFTA's tariff reduction obligations. The next steps are to create a single market and production base, a competitive economic region, a region of equitable economic development, and a region that is fully integrated into the global economy. Since 2007, ASEAN countries have gradually lowered their import duties to member nations. The target is zero import duties by 2016. In February 2016, President Obama initiated the inaugural U.S.-ASEAN summit at Sunnylands for closer engagement with ASEAN, as China's economic and trade growth have dimmed. The territorial disputes in the South China Sea were also discussed. However, in a final joint statement, the Sunnylands Declaration did not allude to the South China Sea by name, instead calling for respect for each nation's sovereignty and for international law. Analysts believe the wording indicated divides within the group on how to respond to China's maritime strategy. Internal market. By the end of 2015, ASEAN plans to establish a common market based upon the four freedoms. The single market will ensure the free flow of goods, services, investment, skilled labor, and the free flow of capital. Until the end of 2010, intra-ASEAN trade was still low. Trade involved mainly exports to countries outside the region, with the exception of Laos and Myanmar, whose foreign trade was ASEAN-oriented, with 80% and 50% respectively of their exports going to other ASEAN countries. In 2009, realized foreign direct investment was $37.9 billion and increased twofold in 2010 to $75.8 billion. 22% of FDI came from the European Union, followed by ASEAN countries, and by Japan and the USA. The ASEAN Framework Agreement on Trade in Services was adopted at the ASEAN Summit in Bangkok in December 1995. Under AFAS, ASEAN member states enter into successive rounds of negotiations to liberalize trade in services with the aim of submitting increasingly higher levels of commitment. At present, ASEAN has concluded 7 packages of commitments under AFAS. Free flow of skilled labor. Mutual recognition agreements have been agreed upon by ASEAN for 8 professions: physicians, dentists, nurses, architects, engineers, accountants, surveyors, and tourism professionals. Individuals in these professions will be free to work in any ASEAN nation after the AEC goes into effect on the 31st of December 2015. Applicants must be licensed and recognized professionals in these fields in the home countries. They can move to other ASEAN countries to practice, but they must pass that country's licensing test. In Thailand, licensing tests will be in the Thai language. In addition, one cannot be an independent practitioner. Any foreign professional intending to work must collaborate with a local business. Given these hurdles, it is unlikely that there will be significant migrations of professionals in the near term. A Chulalongkorn University study predicts that more developed countries stand to benefit the most from the free flow of professionals. Free trade. Free trade initiatives in ASEAN are spearheaded by the implementation of the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement and the Agreement on Customs. These agreements are supported by work done by several sector bodies to plan and to execute free trade measures, guided by the provisions and the requirements of ATIGA and the Agreement on Customs. The progress being made by these sector bodies forms a backbone for achieving the targets of the AEC blueprint and establishing the ASEAN Economic Community by the end of 2015. The year 2007 was the 40th anniversary of ASEAN's formation. It also marked 30 years of diplomatic relations with the USA. On the 26th of August 2007, ASEAN stated that it aims to complete all of its free trade agreements with China, Japan, South Korea, India, Australia, and New Zealand by 2013. This is in line with the start of the ASEAN Economic Community by 2015. In November 2007, ASEAN members signed the ASEAN Charter, a constitution governing relations among ASEAN members and establishing ASEAN itself as an international legal entity. During the same year, the Cebu Declaration on East Asian Energy Security was signed by ASEAN and the other members of the EAS, which pursues energy security by finding energy alternatives to conventional fuels. On the 27th of February 2009, a free trade agreement with the ASEAN regional bloc of 10 countries and Australia, and its close partner New Zealand was signed. It is believed that this FTA would boost combined GDP across the 12 countries by more than $48 billion over the period between 2000 and 2020. ASEAN members, together with the group's 6 major trading partners, began the first round of negotiations on 26 to 28 February 2013 in Bali, Indonesia on the establishment of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. ASEAN 6 Majors. 6 Majors refers to the 6 largest economies in the area that are many times larger than the remaining 4 ASEAN countries. ASEAN Capital Markets Forum. The ACMF is a collaboration among the 7 stock exchanges of Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Singapore. It includes 70% of the transaction values of the 7 ASEAN stock exchanges. Its objective is the integration of ASEAN stock exchanges so as to compete with international exchanges. Development gap. When Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia joined ASEAN in the late 1990s, concerns were raised about a gap in average per capita GDP between older and newer members. In response, the Initiative for ASEAN Integration was formed by ASEAN as a regional integration policy with the goal of bridging this developmental divide, which, in addition to disparities in per capita GDP, is manifested by disparities in dimensions of human development such as life expectancy and literacy rates. Other than the II, other programs for the development of the Mekong Basin, where all 4 newer ASEAN members are located, that tend to focus on infrastructure development were enacted. In general, ASEAN does not have the financial resources to extend substantial grants or loans to the new members. Therefore, it usually leaves the financing of these infrastructure projects to international financial institutions and to developed countries. Nevertheless, it mobilized funding from these institutions and countries, and from the ASEAN 6 themselves, for areas where the development gap needs to be bridged through the II program. Other programs intended for the development of the ASEAN 4 take advantage of the geographical proximity of the CLMV countries and tend to focus on infrastructure development in areas like transport, tourism, and power transmission. Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership (RCEP) consists of all 10 ASEAN countries plus 6 countries which have trade agreements with ASEAN countries. RCEP covers 45% of the world's population and about a third of the world's total GDP. For example, 60% of New Zealand's exports are to RCEP countries. RCEP is an extension of ASEAN Plus 3, and then ASEAN Plus 6. Monetary Union. The concept of an Asian currency unit started in the middle of the 90s, prior to the 1997 Asian financial crisis. It is a proposed basket of Asian currencies, similar to the European currency unit, which was the precursor of the euro. The Asian Development Bank is responsible for exploring the feasibility and construction of the basket. Since the ACU is being considered to be a precursor to a common currency in the future, it has a dynamic outlook of the region. The overall goal of a common currency is to contribute to the financial stability of a regional economy, including price stability. It means lower cost of cross-border business through the elimination of currency risk from the members of the monetary union. Greater flows of intra-regional trade would put pressure pressure on prices, resulting in cheaper goods and services. Individuals benefit not only from the lowering of prices they save by not having to change money when traveling within the Union, by being able to compare prices more readily, and by the reduced cost of transferring money across borders. However, there are conditions for a common currency: the intensity of intra-regional trade and the convergence of macroeconomic conditions. Substantial intra-ASEAN trade and economic integration is an incentive for a monetary union. Intra-ASEAN trade is growing, partly as a result of the ASEAN Free Trade Area and the ASEAN Economic Community. However, some obstacles remain. ASEAN currently trades more with other countries than among its member countries. Therefore, ASEAN economies are more concerned about currency stability against major international currencies, like the US dollar. On macroeconomic conditions, ASEAN member countries have different levels of economic development capacity, and priorities that translate into different levels of interest and readiness. Monetary integration, however, implies less control over national monetary and fiscal policy to stimulate the economy. Therefore, greater convergence in macroeconomic conditions is being enacted to improve conditions and confidence in a common currency. On the other hand, there are also constraints on the adoption of one currency, such as the following: diversity in the level of economic development across countries, weaknesses in the financial sectors of many countries, inadequacy of regional-level resource pooling mechanisms and institutions required for forming and managing a currency union, and lack of political preconditions for monetary cooperation and a common currency. Free trade agreements. ASEAN has concluded free trade agreements with China, Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and India. ASEAN-India bilateral trade crossed the $70 billion target in 2012. The agreement with People's Republic of China created the ASEAN-China Free Trade Area, which went into full effect on the 1st of January 2010. In addition, ASEAN is currently negotiating a free trade agreement with the European Union. The Republic of China has also expressed interest in an agreement with ASEAN but needs to overcome diplomatic objections from China. Treaty of Amity and AMP Cooperation. The Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia, signed at the first ASEAN Summit on the 24th of February 1976, declared that in the relations with one another, the high contracting parties should be guided by the following fundamental principles: mutual respect for the independence, sovereignty, equality, territorial integrity, and national identity of all nations, the right of every state to lead its national existence free from external interference, subversion or coercion, non-interference in the internal affairs of one another, settlement of differences or disputes by peaceful manner, renunciation of the threat or use of force, and effective cooperation among themselves. From CMI to AMRO. Due to the Asian financial crisis of 1997 to 1998, and the long and difficult negotiations with the International Monetary Fund, ASEAN Plus 3 agreed to set up a mainly bilateral currency swap scheme known as the 2000 Chiang Mai Initiative in anticipation of another financial crisis in the future. In 2006 they agreed to meld the CMI with multilateralization and call it CMIM. On the 3rd of May 2009, they agreed to make a currency pool consisting of contributions, $38.4 billion each by China and Japan, $19.2 billion by South Korea, and $24 billion from all ASEAN members, totaling $120 billion. A key component has also been added recently, with the establishment of a surveillance unit. The ASEAN Plus 3 Macroeconomic and Research Office started operations in Singapore in May 2011. It performs a key regional surveillance function of the $120 billion Chiang Mai Initiative multilateralization currency swap facility. Some analysts think that the sum of $120 billion is relatively small, so coordination and help from the IMF is still needed. On 3 May 2012, ASEAN plus 3 finance ministers agreed to double emergency reserve funds to $240 billion. Single aviation market. The ASEAN Single Aviation Market is the region's aviation policy geared towards the development of a unified and single aviation market in Southeast Asia. The aviation policy was proposed by the ASEAN Air Transport Working Group, supported by the ASEAN Senior Transport Officials Meeting, and endorsed by the ASEAN Transport Ministers. The ASEAN SAM is expected to liberalize air travel between member states in the ASEAN region, allowing ASEAN airlines to benefit directly from the growth in air travel, and also free up tourism, trade, investment, and service flows between member states. Since 1 December 2008, restrictions on the third and fourth freedoms of the air between capital cities of member states for air passenger services have been removed, while from 1 January 2009, full liberalization of air freight services in the region took effect. On 1 January 2011, full liberalization on fifth freedom traffic rights between all capital cities took effect. The ASEAN Single Aviation Market policy supersedes existing unilateral, bilateral, and multilateral air services agreements among member states which are inconsistent with its provisions.